I nearly dropped my coffee when I pulled into my driveway and saw it my barn. My old, weathered, hand-painted red barn was now a blinding, bubblegum pink. Not just pink. Neon, like someone told a toddler to pick the color. It looked like a Barbie dream house exploded. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank. But then I saw the HOA's official little laminated notice duct taped to the barn doors. Color updated to comply with aesthetic standards. Approved by HOA President Sharon Zeller. Sharon, of course. Mid-50s, stacked platinum blonde hair, always wearing a pastel blazer like she was running for mayor of Stepford. She'd been a pain since the day I moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago. Claimed my farm aesthetic clashed with the modern suburban vibe they were curating. I live on the edge of the neighborhood, for crying out loud. The only people who even see my barn are me and the squirrels. I stormed inside and called the HOA office. Naturally, Sharon picked up. "Zadden Newell," she said sweetly, "I'm so glad you noticed. We had a committee meeting and decided that the old barn simply wasn't in line with the community's color palette. Pink is much more welcoming. You trespassed onto my property and painted my structure without permission. It's community property aesthetics, Zadden. You signed the HOA agreement when you moved in." Page 32, paragraph 4, minor aesthetic improvements. "That's not a minor improvement, it's vandalism." She hung up. That's when I knew she wasn't just clueless Sharon thought she could do whatever she wanted. I called my buddy Ruben, who's a contractor, to confirm what I already suspected. "Zadden," he said, standing in front of the monstrosity, "this ain't improvement. This is a crime scene." I spent that weekend gathering photos, timestamps from my security cameras, copies of the HOA bylaws. They were vague, but not this vague. No clause allowed forced repainting of private structures, especially not without written notice or homeowner consent. Then I made a call to my cousin Soren. She's a real estate lawyer in the city, sharp as a scalpel and twice as dangerous. "You got video?" she asked. "Full footage. HOA truck, 2 guys in uniforms, paint cans, the whole thing. I'll take the case." And I'm billing it to her personally. By Monday, we had filed a cease and desist, a property damage report, and a formal complaint with the county. Then the real fun started. By Tuesday morning, I had 3 missed calls from Sharon. I didn't call back. Instead, I forwarded the calls to Soren. She had already drafted a formal demand for restitution, citing property damage, trespassing, and violation of state statutes. But she wasn't stopping there. "You're not the only one with complaints about this woman," she said, scrolling through a document she'd compiled. 3 other homeowners filed grievances in the last year alone. 2 of them backed off when Sharon threatened them with special assessments. Special assessments was Sharon's speak for fabricated fines. Soren flagged that phrase and added it to the list of coercive tactics we'd be submitting to the county's oversight committee. We weren't just going after repainting costs. We were building a case of chronic abuse of power. That morning, I went to check on the barn again. The paint job looked even worse in daylight, patchy, with streaks of pink dripping down the siding like melting cotton candy. They hadn't even bothered with primer. It was a rush job, done in the middle of the night. My neighbor from 2 doors down, Hank, pulled up beside me in his dusty old pickup. He leaned out the window. "You see what she did to Johnson's shutters?" he asked. I shook my head. "Painted them lime green last month. Told him it was a pilot color test. He was out of town visiting his daughter. Came back to a house that looked like a citrus explosion." He nodded at the barn. "This is bigger than paint, man. She's trying to scare people into compliance. That's why I never joined the HOA officially." That caught my attention. "Wait, you're not under them?" "Nope. My deed predates the HOA charter. They keep sending me notices, but legally they can't touch me." That was a new angle. If Sharon was trying to assert control over homes not legally under her jurisdiction, she wasn't just overstepping, she was potentially committing fraud. I asked Hank if he'd be willing to talk to Soren. He agreed on the spot. By Wednesday, we had a growing list of testimonials. One couple said Sharon had demanded they replace their wooden fence with a pre-approved vinyl model, then fined them $500 when they didn't comply despite no such requirement existing in the HOA rules. Another family claimed she'd threatened to revoke their pool permit unless they donated to the Community Beautification Fund. That one alone was enough to raise eyebrows. Then came the real break. Soren called me that night, her voice sharper than usual, like she just bit into something juicy. She paid the painter under the table. I sat up. How do you know? I pulled county contractor permits. No registered contractor filed for exterior work at your address. But I found a payment trail Venmo of all things from the HOA account to a guy named Luis Delgado. He's a handyman. Not a licensed painter. She paused. And Luis has a record. 2 counts of trespassing, 1 unresolved complaint for property damage from a previous job. That was it. We had proof that Sharon had used HOA funds to hire an unlicensed individual with a criminal record to illegally enter private property and deface it. Soren immediately escalated the matter to the county attorney's office. Thursday morning, 2 plainclothes officers came to speak with me. I showed them the security footage, the payment records, and the HOA notice Sharon had taped to the barn. They asked for the original copy, which I'd preserved in a Ziploc bag, and took it into evidence. They didn't say much, but I saw the younger officer raise his eyebrows when he read the wording. Later that afternoon, I drove past the HOA's office, just a converted garage at the edge of the neighborhood, and saw a squad car parked outside. Sharon stood on the porch, arms crossed, lips pressed into a line as she spoke to the officers. She saw me drive by. Her expression didn't budge. Friday, I received a letter from the county. They were launching a formal investigation into the HOA's financial practices. Sharon was being asked to step down during the audit. A temporary administrator would oversee operations until the outcome was determined, but that wasn't even the best part. Saturday, I got another call from Soren. She caved. Already, she doesn't want it going to court. She's offering to pay for the repainting out of pocket. Full restoration, materials and labor, licensed contractor, your choice, but there's a catch. I waited. She wants a non-disclosure agreement. No press, no public statements. I laughed. Tell her no deal. I want the barn fixed, but I'm not keeping this quiet. People need to know. Soren chuckled. I figured. I already drafted a counteroffer. She pays for the repainting, agrees to a written apology, and we file a motion for community restitution. If she refuses, we proceed with criminal charges. That night, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't a contractor. It was Sharon, no pastel blazer this time, just a plain beige jacket and jeans. She looked smaller somehow, like a balloon with the air let out. I'm here to apologize, she said. I overstepped. I was trying to maintain standards. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I crossed my arms. You hired a guy with a record to paint my barn in the middle of the night. She blinked. Yes, I made a mistake. No, you made a decision. She looked down. I'll pay for the repainting, professionally, whatever color you want. And I'll step down if the board asks me to. They already did. She nodded once. By Monday, a licensed team arrived. They stripped the pink, sanded down the slats, and repainted the barn in its original deep, rustic red. Not a trace of the neon nightmare remained. But the real restoration happened at the next HOA meeting. With Sharon absent, the temporary administrator, an older gentleman named Clarence, who had once chaired the county zoning committee, opened the floor to grievances. What followed was a 2-hour flood of residents airing years of issues, fines, threats, and manipulations. I waited until the end to speak. Sharon's gone, I said. But the problem wasn't just her. It's the way the system allowed her to operate unchecked. If we want a better community, we need transparency, accountability, and limits on what the HOA can and can't do. The room erupted in applause. A vote was called. The bylaws were amended. Fines now required board approval. All assessments had to be itemized and justified. Any structural changes demanded homeowner consent in writing. And most importantly, no one, under any circumstances, was allowed to alter someone else's property without a court order. The barn still stood tall at the edge of the neighborhood. It looked the same as it always had, but now, when people passed by, they didn't just see weathered wood and red paint. They saw the line. The one that said, "This far, no further." I figured that once Sharon was removed and the barn was returned to its rightful color, things would settle into something resembling peace. For about 3 weeks, that seemed to be the case. The neighborhood felt lighter, people waved more, dogs barked less. Even the community garden, long neglected, got some attention from a few residents who admitted they'd been too intimidated to get involved before. But then the county audit results came in. Clarence knocked on my door early one Saturday morning, carrying a folder so thick it could have doubled as a brick. He looked like he hadn't slept, but his eyes gleamed with something between vindication and fury. "I thought you should be the first to see this," he said, handing me the report. "Sharon wasn't just pushing paint and fences. She's been diverting funds, big ones." I opened the folder and scanned the executive summary. Unauthorized expenditures, undocumented withdrawals, false vendor entries. Over 3 years, more than $60,000 had been rerouted from the HOA's general fund into what the report called untraceable disbursements. The language was careful, but the implication was clear. Someone had been embezzling. "She set up a fake landscaping company," Clarence said, tapping a line item near the bottom. "Greenstone Maintenance. Doesn't exist. Registered to a P.O. box in a strip mall outside of town. Payments were marked for beautification services every month like clockwork." I narrowed my eyes. "And the board never noticed," he sighed. "She rarely let anyone else see the full ledger. Claimed she was streamlining operations. When someone asked questions, she'd either slap them with a fine or call a special meeting and outvote them with proxies." I closed the folder. "So what happens now?" "She's under investigation. County prosecutor's office confirmed it yesterday. They're digging into her personal finances. If they find a money trail, she could be facing felony theft." That should have been satisfying, it was, but a thought gnawed at me. How many people paid those fines she made up? How many were scared into compliance just so she could keep covering her tracks? Clarence nodded solemnly. "Too many." That afternoon, several neighbors gathered at my place, most of them clutching notices, invoices, and screenshots of bank statements. Some of the charges were laughable: $200 for excessive wind chimes, $300 for visual disharmony due to lawn gnome clutter. But others represented desperate decisions. Elderly residents who'd paid without protest, single parents too exhausted to push back, renters who left after a single notice. Soren joined us via video call, reviewing each document with her usual precision. "If the money went into the HOA account and was misused," she said, "we may be able to file a class action suit, not just restitution, punitive damages. But I'll need sworn statements and proof of payment." By the end of the night, we had over 20 affidavits. Each one told a different story, but the pattern was unmistakable. Sharon hadn't just been mismanaging the HOA, she'd been running it like a private piggy bank, using fear to prop up the illusion of order. Then came the twist no one expected. The new interim treasurer, a quiet retiree named Elsie, discovered that Sharon had applied for a grant from the state's Neighborhood Improvement Fund. It was supposed to go toward community upgrades, benches, lighting, repaving the walking trail behind the park. The application had been approved nearly a year ago. $40,000 had been dispersed, but none of that money had been spent. It was gone. The state auditor got involved. Then the local news. A reporter showed up outside the HOA office, microphone in hand, asking pointed questions about misappropriated public funds. A camera crew filmed the peeling mailbox and the outdated bulletin board, juxtaposed with the grant description. Modernizing shared spaces for safety and accessibility. Sharon had gone silent. Her phone disconnected, her email bounced back auto-replies, and her house sat dark for days. Eventually, someone spotted a moving truck in her driveway one night, boxes loaded in a hurry. But she didn't get far. A week later, she was arrested at her sister's house 2 counties over. Fraud, larceny, misuse of public funds, the charges stacked like bricks. The sheriff's department released a statement confirming the arrest, and the paper ran a front-page headline the next day. HOA president accused of embezzling over $100K. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Once the legal dust started to settle, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't in the old converted garage. We rented the school gymnasium. Hundreds of residents showed up, Clarence took the stage first, followed by Elsie and two other board members. Then, to my surprise, they called my name. I stood, walked to the microphone, and faced the crowd. "We all want to move on," I said. "But we can't do that unless we look at how this happened. We gave too much power to one person. We signed forms without reading them. We paid fines we didn't question. It's not just about Sharon, it's about creating something better." The room was still, but not silent. People nodded. A few murmured their agreement. "I propose we dissolve the current HOA structure," I continued, "and replace it with a neighborhood council. Representatives from each block, term limits, full financial transparency, no more secret votes, no more unilateral decisions." A man in the back stood up. "And what about the fines we already paid?" Soren, seated near the front, raised her hand. "If we win the suit, those payments can be reimbursed, but we need the council in place to manage the process." The vote was called, and for the first time in the neighborhood's history, the decision was unanimous. The HOA was officially disbanded by the end of the month. In its place, the North Ridge Neighborhood Council was formed. Volunteers stepped up to serve not to control, but to keep things fair. For the first time in years, people felt like their voices mattered. As for the barn, it became something of a symbol, not just of resistance, but of resilience. One Saturday, a group of kids from the local art class asked if they could paint a mural on the back wall. "Not permanent, just something seasonal," they said. I agreed. They painted a sprawling landscape, rolling fields, a blue sky, a figure standing tall in front of a red barn, no pink in sight. I never saw Sharon again, not in person. But at the sentencing hearing, I sat in the back row as the judge read the charges aloud. She never looked up. Her lawyer made a last-ditch plea for leniency, citing stress and overwork. The judge wasn't buying it. "You abused your authority, manipulated your neighbors, and stole from people who trusted you," he said. "That's not stress. That's criminal." She was sentenced to 4 years, suspended after 18 months if she repaid every cent and completed community service. I walked out of the courtroom into the spring air, feeling lighter than I had in years. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was something you could fight for and win. The neighborhood was quiet the morning the restitution checks arrived. They came in plain, white envelopes, hand-delivered by a courier hired by the newly formed council. Each envelope bore the council's seal and a simple note. "Enclosed is your reimbursement and a formal apology for the financial harm you endured under the former HOA administration." There were no disclaimers, no conditions, just the check and something that mattered more: acknowledgement. Elsie had led the effort to personally verify every claim. It had taken weeks of cross-referencing bank records, old board meeting minutes, and emails residents had forwarded in from years past. What surprised everyone was the sheer volume of hidden damage, not just in money, but in the way people's trust had been slowly eroded. Clarence had quietly resigned once the council was fully operational, joking that he'd only ever intended to be a bandage until the bleeding stopped. He left behind a newly digitized ledger, a transparent vote tracking system, and a signed letter recommending a rotating oversight committee for future councils. I wasn't on the council I didn't want to be. I'd already played my part. But that didn't mean I was done. The county prosecutor reached out about 2 weeks after Sharon's sentencing. A team had been digging into financial records tied to the state grant, and they'd uncovered something darker than anyone had expected: a second false company. This one registered under the name of a deceased man from out of state. The address linked to an abandoned warehouse, and the bank account opened under the alias had been drained and closed 6 months earlier. The funds, traced to a private investment account in Arizona. Soren took the call with me on speaker. "This goes beyond HOA funds," the prosecutor said. "We're talking federal grant fraud and identity misuse. The state wants to pursue additional charges." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. How many years does that carry, if convicted? Another 10. Minimum. Sharon had already started her community service requirement, mostly sorting donated clothes at a local shelter, but word of the new charges spread quickly. The local news station ran another story, this time focusing on systemic oversight failures, and how one woman manipulated an entire community's governance for personal gain. Soren, ever the strategist, offered to coordinate with the state attorney's office as a special advisor. She'd built a case file thicker than any of them had expected, and her attention to detail had already won over the auditors. "You've done more than just fix one problem," the lead auditor told her during a case conference. "You've exposed a loophole in how these associations operate statewide." That led to something no one saw coming: a legislative hearing. I was asked to testify. The chamber was cold, and the committee members sat behind a curved wooden bench that made them look like judges. I wasn't nervous, just tired of the whole thing, but I told them what they needed to hear. "I'm not against neighborhood associations," I said, "but there needs to be oversight, checks and balances. Otherwise, you end up with someone like Sharon Zeller, someone who uses fear and bureaucracy like tools." One of the representatives, a woman with silver-framed glasses and a sharp voice, asked, "Would you support mandatory financial audits for all associations over a certain size?" "Yes." "And mandatory term limits," another leaned forward. "Anything else? Require that all fines and assessments be itemized and appealable. Give people a real process, not just a complaint box that never gets opened." They nodded, took notes, promised to draft something. Back home, things were shifting. The mural on the barn changed with the seasons now. The kids had painted over the original landscape with a fall harvest scene: hay bales, pumpkins, and a windmill. I'd built a small bench beside it, and people sometimes stopped there on walks, especially in the evenings. It had become a sort of quiet meeting point, unofficial but understood. One afternoon, a woman I didn't recognize walked up while I was watering the rosemary by the porch. She had a canvas tote over her shoulder and a clipboard in hand. "You're Zadin, right?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm Leah. I just bought the house at the end of Pine Hollow, the one with the big dog statue out front." "Yeah, I know it. Welcome." She shifted the clipboard. "I heard about what happened. Not just the barn, the whole thing. I'm helping organize a coalition of neighborhoods trying to restructure their own HOAs. We're calling it the Homeowner Advocacy Alliance. I was hoping you'd consider speaking at our summit next month." I paused, wiping my hands on a towel. "I'm not much of a speaker." "You don't have to be," she said. "People just want to hear from someone who fought back and won." I agreed to attend, mostly because it felt like the right thing. And maybe, in some way, it was the final chapter I didn't realize I needed. The summit was held in a community center 2 towns over. About 60 people showed up, some angry, some exhausted, some just curious. I told them the truth. Don't wait until someone like Sharon runs things into the ground. Read your documents, ask questions, get involved even when it feels like the small stuff. Afterwards, several attendees came up to speak with me. One man said his HOA threatened to tow his truck because it looked too industrial. Another woman said her board had denied her solar panel request 3 times, even though state law protected her right to install them. They all had stories. But unlike before, now they had each other. The council back home eventually voted to turn the old HOA office into a shared space, part reading room, part event hall. Elsie taught knitting classes there on Thursdays. Hank started a monthly poker night. The place felt alive for the first time. Months later, I got a final update from the prosecutor's office. Sharon had accepted a plea deal on the federal charges. She would serve additional time, and her assets, what remained of them, were being liquidated to repay the state grant and cover civil penalties. I didn't celebrate when I heard. There was nothing satisfying about someone ruining their life through greed and arrogance. But I did feel closure. The kind that comes not from revenge, but from restoration. As spring rolled in again, I found myself repainting a section of the barn's trim. Not because I had to. Just because I wanted to. The red was still deep and bold, like it had always been, and the paint went on smooth. Behind me, the wind caught the corner of a flyer posted at the edge of the fence. It flapped once, then settled. A notice for the next council meeting. Topics: expanded garden plots, new library drop box, and a proposal for a neighborhood art walk. No threats. No fines, just ideas. I stood back, brush in hand, and looked at the barn. It stood exactly where it always had, same structure, same sturdy frame, but now it meant something more. It was a reminder that no matter how deep a problem goes, it can be dug out, rebuilt, repainted, not just in red but in truth.